Childhood fantasies accompany each of us. I'm sure you have had them too. Many people dream of one day realizing them. For some it is to become a policeman, for others it is to buy a car. My wife, however, was different. Her fantasy involved betrayal and the destruction of our solid marriage. This madness caught up with me as I was disposing of the remains of the barbecue. Suddenly I stopped, feeling goosebumps run down my skin, reminding me of déjà vu. This strange sensation was not new to me, for I had experienced it at every similar moment. The incident I was going through seemed to be just a variation on a theme of events I had already experienced, a phenomenon I jokingly called déjà. This encounter was the second meeting organized by my wife Penny for her new colleague, accompanied by a promotion at work in the last 3 months. Technically, she still had a month's probationary period left, but given her abilities, it was more of a formality. Now, she didn't have to endure the whole tedious journey. Among the attendees were Penny's executives from Halifax Industries, along with their significant others. I didn't love them, but had to fulfill my marital duties for the sake of harmony. I tried to dissuade Penny from attending this particular social event, but she insisted, although I never understood the reasons. These people had somehow contributed to her career, and she felt obligated to express her gratitude. While I quietly cooked steaks and drank beer, they bragged about themselves and I smiled graciously while Penny played the role of hostess. My inner alarm arose when I heard a commotion in the house. All the partners of my wife Penny's co-workers were saying their goodbyes and heading off to the bachelorette party. I knew none of them would bother to thank their hosts. Every one of them was arrogant to the core. That left Penny in the company of 5 male colleagues. I tried to remember how long the last such event had taken. At the last barbecue we'd had, I'd woken up the next day shattered and exhausted. That time I had gotten pretty drunk on tequila. After opening the door, I could see the well-lit living room. What caught my attention was so unusual that my hair stood up. All of Penny's friends were sitting in the living room, and Penny herself was standing in the kitchen doorway talking to them. She threw a quick glance over her shoulder and walked through the kitchen to the brightly lit entertainment area on the patio overlooking the backyard. It was obvious she was making sure no one entered unexpectedly, which alarmed me since I was the only one outside. What could she be discussing without wanting me to overhear? My intuition and experience told me something wasn't right here. Going back outside to finish cleaning up seemed reasonable. When I stepped out into the light again, Penny appeared in the patio doorway. "Are you almost done, Kiss?" she asked. "Yeah, just need to clean the grill and I'll be free. Give me about 5 minutes," I replied, smiling the familiar smile that had once won my heart, and she slipped back into the kitchen while I cleaned the barbecue. I watched Penny from around the corner. She was busy making a large batch of margarita cocktail. Once she was done, she poured the drinks into 7 glasses. My senses sharpened when I saw her pull an envelope from her pocket. They went into full alert mode as she glanced cautiously in my direction before ripping it open and pouring the powdery contents into one of the glasses. She stirred the drink for a good 30 seconds, all the while never taking her eyes off me. Raising the glass to the light, she scrutinized it carefully before glancing furtively at me. Meanwhile, I continued to clean the barbecue, feigning ignorance. Penny finished her preparations and placed the special drink on the kitchen table along with the other glasses on a tray. I desperately hoped that this special drink was for one of her coworkers who had pissed her off and was about to fall victim to the old laxative prank. My last hope evaporated when Penny disappeared into the living room with a tray, oblivious to the confusion. I finished cleaning up, covered the stove, and ventured into my room. My horrible suspicions were confirmed when I returned to the house. Penny entered from the opposite side, picked up a refillable drink, and offered it to me. "I made the drink for you," she said. I took the drink, cautiously treating it like poison, but with more uncertainty than decision. I needed to buy some time. I pretended to take a sip, noticing Penny's sharp gaze on me, checking to see if I noticed anything. I complimented her on the taste. "How much did you have to drink tonight?" she asked. "About 8 beers, I guess." I lied. It was actually less than half that amount. "Okay, I'll let the guys know that they'll have to find their own way home," she said. "Then you don't mind if I finish my drink in the other room? After all, it's not like your friends have been monopolizing my time all night," I said. With a strange look, Penny turned and walked back into the living room. I remained in the kitchen, greatly puzzled. Why had Penny ruined my drink? What exactly had she put in it? At least I could solve one question. I walked over to the medicine cabinet and found the expected bottle of sleeping pills in plain sight to check its contents. Opening the bottle, I sniffed its contents and examined the solution. Penny always kept preparations and pests on the kitchen counter. There was indeed a white powder residue inside, the odor of which matched the pills in the bottle. One thing was clear. I was going to be incapacitated while Penny was alone in the house with 5 men. It didn't take exceptional intelligence to draw a horrible conclusion from these circumstances. Despite my deep affection for Penny and the assumption of her reciprocal feelings, my certainty could not exceed 99.9%. I craved that last 0.1%, and there was only one way to achieve it. I poured about a quarter of my drink into the sink before walking from the study to the formal living room at the back of the house. As I passed by, the conversation died down and a few men glanced in my direction. Upon reaching the living room, I turned on the television and poured another quarter cup over the potted plant. After 10 minutes, my attention was diverted from the game playing on the screen and my mind whirled with questions. Suddenly, I noticed movement with my peripheral vision. Without turning my head, I saw Penny peering at me through the doorway before disappearing again. I concluded that I couldn't move on with the information I had at the moment. I poured the remaining drink into the potted plant and impatiently checked the time. I was relieved to see how slowly time was flowing. After the 10 minutes I had allotted myself, I suddenly rolled off the chair and onto the floor. Landing on my stomach, the sound of my fall must have reached the next room. Penny was at my side within seconds. She flipped me over onto my back and contemplated my face while screaming my name. I heard the rustle of her clothes as she got up and left the room. When Penny returned, I sensed that there were at least 2 guys with her. I listened as she told them to lift me up, warning them to be careful. I discovered how difficult it is to completely relax in a hostile environment. I was carried somewhere and placed on a bed. Since we didn't go up any stairs, it must have been a spare room downstairs. The situation did not look promising. I could feel the presence of all 3 of us in the room. "I'll be there in a minute. I need to make sure he's comfortable." I heard them moving away. Footsteps muffled by the carpet. Penny untied my shoes and took them off. She undid my belt and loosened my shirt before leaning over and kissing my cheek. "I'm sorry, Kissa. I love you and I'm sorry you made it necessary. I promise this will be the last time," she said as she walked away. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed down the hallway. She seemed certain that I was deeply asleep, which was confirmed by her lack of effort to close the door quietly. The confidence that had been at 99.9% had increased to 99.999%. Reacting quickly, I jumped up and pressed my ear against the door for a moment before carefully opening it. Laughter and giggles reached my ears along with the unsettling sound of multiple footsteps ascending the stairs. The area upstairs consisted solely of bedrooms and bathrooms. After giving them a brief head start to make sure no one was lingering, I made my way up the stairs silently. At the master bedroom door, I waited until my pulse stabilized. Despite my efforts, the sounds from inside kept my pulse from dropping below 200 beats per minute. Gaining my resolve, I took a deep breath and very carefully opened the door. The remaining 1% confidence hit me like a freight train. They say that love fades gradually. To this I reply, nonsense. Through a crack in the door, I could see Penny having fun with a man in bed. Other men stood nearby and watched. She was cheating on me, and apparently she was enjoying it. In my haste to get back downstairs, I left the door ajar. I rushed into the kitchen and threw up in the sink. Wiping my mouth, I walked into the living room feeling like a zombie. Without realizing it, I opened the gun safe and picked up a snub-nosed .38 revolver. The feel of the cold metal in my sweaty palms brought me back to reality. Was it worth killing my wife? Was it worth her dying so I could get a life sentence? Some rationality crept into my thoughts. A confrontation with the partygoers upstairs with a gun could lead to uncontrollable anger. But a confrontation without a gun could lead to injury. Neither option was acceptable. There had to be a third way. A way that would hurt the 5 assholes and the promiscuous woman upstairs, ensuring my freedom. Collapsing on the couch, I struggled to make sense of it all. 7 years ago, I met Penny, also known as Dee, in a rather tense situation. I was driving along Serene, a country road. As I drove by, I noticed 2 parked cars. I noticed a petite girl surrounded by 3 men. Her concerned look on her face made me stop. I couldn't say exactly what prompted my action. Perhaps it was intuition, but something about the scene seemed wrong. I made the decision to turn around and walk back. As two men approached my car and insisted that everything was fine, the girl still looked visibly upset. I ignored them and approached her. When I asked how she was feeling, she obviously moved closer to me, seeking protection. She explained that she had run out of fuel, her phone wasn't working, and the men had stopped when they saw her stranded on the side of the road. I assured the men that I would take care of the situation, encouraging them to exchange information. Noticing the stares, the girl and I hurriedly made our way to my car. We both shuddered as we watched them drive away. I offered her a ride to the nearest gas station. We filled the canister with fuel before heading back to her car. I then followed her to her house to make sure she arrived safely. She was so grateful that she insisted I join her for dinner the next night. 7 months later, we were married. From then on, I was her kiss of Can in shining armor, and she was my D, the damsel in distress. Over the next 7 years, my girlfriend needed help more than a dozen times. It happened so often that I kept a canister of fuel in the garage. No amount of explaining, teasing, or swearing could convince her to keep an eye on the fuel gauge in her car. I still believed we were a happy couple, albeit without children. There was only one difficult period about 4 months ago when Penny became distant and seemed gloomy. When I asked about her problems, she expressed frustration about traveling frequently and mentioned a supervisor position at a job she was eager to take. I supported her aspirations, thinking that if she traveled less, we could start thinking about starting a family. Her frequent absences, surprisingly, kept our relationship going much longer than the typical wedding honeymoon. As the relationship began to deteriorate, our open and honest communication became less effective. About 4 months ago, when she hinted that she wanted to make her favorite's fantasy a reality, I quickly put a stop to it by firmly stating that I would never agree to her participating with more than one man. That made me feel bad again, but my newfound confidence kept me going. I reconsidered my circumstances. 4 months ago, she was faced with the possibility of a promotion. This promotion she sought with the support of her current male supervisors. For an entire month, she hesitated with the decision, periodically asking me if she should give in to her fantasies. This promotion caused her to express her gratitude to those who had supported her ascent. The connection between these events was obvious. Penny had accomplished 2 goals with one unpleasant act. It offered an explanation, but could it be justified? Finding no answer, I retreated to the kitchen and poured myself a generous portion of my finest scotch to symbolically mark the dissolution of my marriage. There was no doubt about it. The marriage had collapsed like a soldier after a firing squad shot. A plan matured in my mind. I carefully considered it and tested its feasibility. It seemed flawless. I evaluated my moral compass. Did her actions, which had wasted 7 years of my life, justify the harshest retribution? Yes, they did. I concluded that my conscience would not be an obstacle. Suddenly, the phone rang. It wasn't mine or Penny's phone. Both were charging on the bench. The sound came from the jacket hanging on the kitchen chair. In the pocket of the jacket was a wallet belonging to Mark Smith. I hesitated for 5 minutes. I was faced with a choice between 2 plans, each of which could do significant damage. Option 1, I would have destroyed Penny's support system and could have involved 5 people. Option 1B would accomplish the same thing, but with the added possibility of getting her in serious trouble. I picked up the phone, then pulled a container of leftover coleslaw salad out of the refrigerator and scooped a large portion into a bowl, adding a few drops of Angurus tincture. I watched as the mixture in the bowl took on a nice orange hue. I then put the 4 sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet I had prepared for myself. Walking over to the front door, I unlocked it and then returned to the kitchen. There I put some coins and another cell phone I found on the counter. Finding 2 thick candles, I clumsily carried all the items except the phones into the spare bedroom and threw them on the bed, mentally listing them so I wouldn't forget anything. Making sure I had everything I needed, I quietly made my way up the stairs, eager to take advantage of the commotion coming from the master bedroom. I quickly dialed Penny's parents' number on her phone and brought it to the door slot. What remained unsure was whether Penny's father would come to investigate the disturbing calls himself or call the police immediately. Despite the impending downfall of Penny's family reputation, I was confident that law enforcement would soon get involved. After 3 calls to Penny's father and satisfied with the result, I turned off her phone and picked up the man's cell phone, turning on the video recording feature. Discreetly widening the slit in the master bedroom door, I noticed Mr. Smith standing off to the side, which conveniently played into my hands. I began recording, capturing the faces of everyone but Mr. Smith. In 30 seconds, no one noticed me. Everyone was too preoccupied. It gave the illusion that Mr. Smith was the one doing the recording, and he could predict the actions of an intoxicated man driven by desire. Carefully closing the door, I made my way down to the first floor, put Penny's phone back in its place and plugged it into the charger. Turning it back on, I picked up Mr. Smith's phone, which would soon become the subject of attention. I forwarded the video clip to all the contacts on his phone. I heard 2 other phones beeping in different corners of the room. They were signaling the approaching commotion in the lives of 6 people. I retreated to the spare bedroom. Before moving on to the next stage, I paused to consider whether I had already punished enough. I concluded that I hadn't. I knew that after the adrenaline subsided, I would be in pain, perhaps indefinitely. Who could tell if I would ever love or trust again? So it seemed only fair that their suffering should also continue indefinitely. Doesn't the Bible say an eye for an eye? For part 2, I turned off the heat in my bedroom, turned off the light bulb, and opened the window to let in fresh cold air from the street to quickly cool the room. Then I lay down on the bed and induced vomiting by sticking my finger down my throat. Despite vomiting, nothing came out. I hoped I hadn't spewed out all my dinner during a previous vomiting attack in the kitchen sink. The second attempt was successful. While vomiting on the pillow next to me hardly felt like a triumph, it was downright disgusting. The smell almost brought on another wave of nausea, but thankfully I managed to suppress it through sheer concentration. I placed a bowl of Collade and sleeping pills beside me, ready for action. I placed a candle under each armpit at nipple level. I rehearsed by squaring my shoulders. I made sure that in doing so, the radial pulse on my wrist disappeared. Plenty of famous people had tragically died of suffocation due to their own vomit. There was no room for doubt as to the cause. The nauseating odor and appearance of vomit, combined with a mouthful of shredded cabbage, could easily have been mistaken for regurgitation in the dim light. In addition, a motionless and lifeless body, devoid of breath and pulse, would certainly have prompted an immediate call for an ambulance from whoever stumbled upon me. This would have prompted Penny to reveal the details of the sleeping pills, which would have set off a chain of events. A subsequent videotape would have amplified the consequences. I could only hope that the first person to arrive wouldn't check for a pulse on my neck. As I waited for the show to begin, I fought the urge to disconnect from Penny's betrayal and the need to remain wary of any visitors. The former feeling seemed to prevail as I was suddenly drawn back in by the loud shouting of Penny's father. I hadn't even noticed his arrival. "What's going on here?" he exclaimed. His voice was soon joined by his wife's squealing and Penny's screams. This scream seemed different from the previous ones, and I found a grim satisfaction in it. I could not linger on it, however, for prolonged action was required. I hastily swallowed 4 sleeping pills and took a bite of lettuce before shoving the bowl under the bed. It was at this time that I heard something like the rumble of a herd of cattle coming down the stairs, accompanied by the squeal of several cars speeding away. I was sure that if I had been outside, I would have smelled burning rubber. In the silence came the voice of Penny's mother. "You damn woman of easy virtue, where's your husband?" Surprisingly, it was her mother's voice. I couldn't remember ever hearing a swear word from her. "Well, daughter you are to me or not, you can be sure he'll hear about it from us. Tell him he can come to visit whenever he wants, but you stay away. You're dead to me. This is not how we raised you. Come on, Clive, let's get out of this brothel," she continued. As the trio descended the stairs, the intensity of their conversation grew. It seemed that Penny's parents were rushing downstairs, and Penny was desperately following them, trying to save their most precious relationship. Soon Penny's sobs were the only sound to break the silence until her parents' car drove away. I was now faced with a dilemma that occurred about 30 minutes before the sleeping pills took effect. I needed to get rid of the cabbage before I risked choking on it in my sleep. How would I explain the presence of candles if I woke up in the hospital, assuming someone would have called an ambulance at all? As I pondered my dilemma, I heard Penny's cell phone ring loudly in the kitchen. She ignored the call at first, but when it rang again a minute and a half later, I heard her footsteps coming past my door. I missed the beginning of the conversation, but soon her voice grew louder and louder. Soon she was standing just outside the guest room door. "What video, Tanya? Oh God damn it, what have I done?" God, no. If I had to guess, the ensuing noise was the sound of a cell phone dropping to the floor, and the scrambling was someone rolling down the wall, losing their balance on their feet. I should have felt safe from my wife's agonizing sobs, but all I felt was impatience. The time for a decision was fast approaching. Let's take stock of the situation. The family is torn apart, her job ruined by the sheer number of contacts in her address book. It was unlikely that her bosses wouldn't recognize her. Penny's boss might even have been among the recipients. Penny's mutual friends are probably lost after the public revelation that she hospitalized me. Penny's only option left was to wake up her husband and apologize to him. Well, at least try. Just call an ambulance. I was already overcome with waves of fatigue. I was even considering eating an SLO before I finally heard movement. It sounded like someone stood up. The sound of a door opening reached my ears. Light from the hallway spilled into the room. Penny must have noticed the vomit, either by the smell or by seeing it on the pillow, because she offed and rushed to the bed. Dave, she shouted, getting no response from me. She ran over to the light switch and flicked it a few times, but the bulb was twisted off. "Dan, light bulb," Penny exclaimed and came back to me. I felt her nearness the moment she noticed the salad. She let out a loud sigh. No. Her warm breath with a hint of tequila touched my cheeks. She sat down on the bed and grabbed my left forearm. I expected it to be cold from her touch and tensed my arm slightly, pressing my shoulder to my side. She tried unsuccessfully to detect my pulse and then, like scenes from movies, pressed her cheek against my mouth to catch my breath. I held my breath, praying she didn't smell the kalau, or if she did attribute it to dinner, it was unlikely she'd smell SLO amidst the unbearable putrid odor of my vomit. Moisture hit my face, but I resisted the reflex to wince or wipe it away. I recognized the sensation when Penny's tears were accompanied by her compressed breathing. She ran around the bed, trying to find a pulse on my other cold, stiff arm. Failing to find it, her reaction seemed odd. A quiet moan turned into a deep groan, culminating in vomiting. Whether it was triggered by the sight of the contents of my stomach on the pillow or the realization of her actions, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that she had fled to the bathroom. Thank God, I thought to myself. I thought I had swallowed the SLO. It wasn't that scary. Maybe now she would call for help. I set 2 candles on the bookshelf, then tossed the bowl of salad out the window before quietly closing it. I collapsed back onto the bed in pretty much the same position as before. After a few minutes, the pills kicked in and I slipped into unconsciousness, still mulling over what I would say when I woke up in the hospital. But as they say about the best laid plans, the reality turned out to be quite different. When I woke up, I felt incredibly weak and was still in the spare bedroom. It was already daylight outside, but Penny was nowhere to be seen. I was shaking uncontrollably. I wandered around the empty house. That cowardly bitch seemed to have escaped. If you want something done right, do it yourself, I thought, and decided to call the police on the non-emergency number. But first, in hopes of easing my headache, I decided to make myself some coffee. Perhaps the 4 sleeping pills were unnecessary. It wasn't until I sat down at the kitchen table that among the remnants of the party, I noticed 4 pieces of paper written in Penny's flowery handwriting. With nothing else to do, I read them. Dear Mom and Dad, I feel it is necessary to clarify what you witnessed tonight. Even though I am embarrassed, I need to be truthful and discuss matters that daughters don't usually share with their parents from childhood. I have a silly fantasy. I know it's common, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I admitted it to Dave, but he made it clear that it would never happen without his approval. Over time, this fantasy completely consumed me. 4 months ago, John Clark, one of the supervisors at work, suggested that I apply for a promotion. He jokingly remarked that if I could outsmart the other supervisors, I could secure a position at Galif. The facts of promotions always require the participation of coworkers. He probably sensed that his words had touched me. After he invited me to lunch, for some inexplicable reason my fantasy became reality. I desperately needed a promotion to cut down on my business travel. He mentioned it to the others and they took it to heart. They originally suggested 6 meetings, but I was able to negotiate 3. You can imagine, I was actually able to do it. The bitter disgust left a foul taste in my mouth. I took a large sip of coffee and swirled it around in my mouth, cutting the meetings down to 3. Had she expected this? They insisted on holding at least one meeting before supporting me, but I quickly put a stop to that. However, they didn't take my word for it. Eventually, we made a deal. All meetings were to take place after I was promoted, but they'd wanted one picture as a guarantee that I would fulfill the terms of the agreement. John and I stayed home one night, and he took my picture. If I refused, he threatened to distribute the photo, forcing me to resign dishonorably. However, I had a plan. If he ever tried to use the photo to get me to go to more sessions, I could charge him with a more serious offense. Thankfully, that scenario never materialized. 5 people backed me up, and I was promoted a week later. We announced plans to have a celebratory dinner, but met at a motel instead. Unfortunately, the session was cut short due to a noise complaint. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut, considering the noise she'd made last night. I could already foresee the noise complaint. I considered refusing to read the letter, but I'd already put too much effort into it. What else could she say to cause additional pain? So last month, we had an event at our house with Dave. The guys organized an after party for their wives and girlfriends at our house. Since Dave rarely travels with John, I decided to put sleeping pills in his drink so we could have a session while he was unconscious. You can probably fill in the blanks yourself. Tonight was supposed to be the last session. Dave was probably asleep in the guest bedroom. I realized that my actions towards Dave were extremely wrong. I had convinced myself that he was not supportive of my aspirations. I had also convinced myself that he was benefiting from the arrangement. The promotion brought us more money and freed me up to travel. I thought it was perfectly acceptable for me to satisfy my desires. After all, it was just a fulfillment of my fantasy. Despite this, I continued to give Dave all the love and attention he could want. He seemed to be satisfied. I'd realized now that these were all silly excuses. In my desire, I ignored the danger to Dave, who has now paid the ultimate price for my selfishness. What you witnessed last night was the final act of my infidelity to my husband. I'm not sure if I can bear the guilt of causing his death, the man who may have once saved my life. Please understand that I deeply regret all my low actions and apologize for the shame I have brought upon my family. I set the letter aside, thinking it sounded like a goodbye letter. She must have realized it too. I picked up the next piece of paper, another letter, this time to the management and employees of Halifax Industries. I have taken full responsibility for my actions and apologize for tarnishing the company's reputation, it began. She briefly reiterated what she had said in the letter to her parents and cut to the chase. I have reached out to Jan Partners and other interested parties. While it is not entirely my fault, I acknowledge my role in damaging your relationship due to my reckless behavior. I offer my sincere apologies. There was another piece of paper. To whom could she turn? After all, she thought I was dead, as she had described in a letter to her parents. I read how she addressed her lover Dave. To my knight in shining armor, the man I have treasured since you saved me so many years ago. You deserve so much better than someone as unfaithful as me. I pray that you forgive me so that we can stay together forever. Penny. As I read the letter, my tears soaked the already crumpled third page, revealing the depth of passion and desperation within it. It was then I realized Penny's intentions and wondered what method she might have chosen. She wasn't in any of the rooms downstairs. Despite my unsteady legs, I quickly climbed the stairs, 2 steps at a time. She wasn't in our bedroom, the bathroom, or the extra bedroom. With a sense of dejection, I walked down the stairs and outside, opening the door to the detached garage. A faint haze and the smell of gasoline greeted me in the dim light. I spotted Penny's car preparing for the noxious exhaust. I approached, knowing what I would discover. A section of hose was running from the exhaust pipe to the ajar window on the passenger side. The engine was silent, and the smell of exhaust indicated that it hadn't been running for some time. Opening the driver's door, I found my beloved wife reclined with her eyes closed. Her face had taken on a faint pinkish hue. As I adjusted to the darkness, I searched for a pulse on her carotid artery, but found none. Her skin was icy to the touch, confirming that she wasn't faking it like I was. The bulbs on the dashboard lit up, showing that the fuel gauge was dangerously low. Reality hit me. Penny was gone. I was seized with guilt. She had given in to her base desires by engaging in a relationship with her coworkers. Although I also played a part in the story, in the end, her decisions led to a loss of respect from her parents and possibly her friends. It also contributed to the destruction of several marriages and the collapse of her career. Although she ruined our marriage and undermined my trust in humanity, I couldn't completely absolve myself of blame. Penny's ultimate decision to end things to avoid the consequences of her actions could be seen as an act of cowardice. I backed away from the car, nearly tripping over something hidden in the darkness. When I got in and looked down, I instinctively noticed my 25-liter Jerry's spouted canister. It was empty. It was full just last weekend. It seemed Penny had finally developed the habit of checking the fuel level. A leisurely wait for the police was no longer an option, so I dialed the ambulance. It arrived ahead of the police, just minutes before it became apparent that Penny was indeed dead. We left her at the scene for police examination. 2 officers took my statement, during which I recounted the events and submitted my notes after the blood test. Penny's letter and the statements of several witnesses were presented. John and others were arrested for being complicit in my drugging. The term accomplice is appropriate. John, as the leader of the group, was sentenced to 3 years in prison, while the others received minor fines because it could not be proven that they knew about the drug use. 3 of them eventually divorced. One of them begged for alms so badly that he was left with permanent scars on his knees. The last one had to endure the agony of watching his wife go out on the street, pick up strangers, and bring them home. Halifax Industries had to hire 6 new employees because of the chaos one diminutive woman seemed to cause. Over time, my guilt at Penny's suffering diminished and my anger at her actions toward me increased. When the anger surpassed the guilt, I realized it was time to move on. I met a wonderful divorced woman named Mary. I adore her, and she assures me that she will never betray me. However, I still doubt this is the end of the story. Share what you think of this story in the comments. We'll be interested to read your thoughts. Also, don't forget to put a like and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new, no less interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!
Thank you so much for watching my video and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button. Also, I am very interested to know your personal opinion about this story. You can write it in the comments. I will definitely read it and reply to you personally.